All right, good morning, everybody. We've got 23 folks, or 24 now. Morning, Al. So let's get going here. Hope everyone is doing well. Welcome to at least the last meeting of this phase. I'm sure we'll be getting together again sometime in the very near future. And just as a reminder, I am recording this. So thank you for all the comments and questions and everything that I got back in relation to the first draft. As I tried to point out in the agenda that everyone hopefully received, made some a few minor what I think are minor changes, but just want to run them by everyone, and then have a few things to address that parties raised. So first, we went from partial consensus to or from general consensus to partial. That's not a big deal, I don't think. There was a request to change joint utilities to joint Exelon utilities. I can't imagine that that is a major issue. If it is, let me know. And I also changed ZVIC to Mr. Verchinsky. There was another proposed change that Paul had recommended or suggested. He wanted to change stakeholders to either public participation or public participants, which I believe he indicated was similar to how FERC refers to stakeholders. Do folks have a concern? Do they like it? Do they care?
Judge McLean, OPC doesn't have any issues with that, and actually, I think there's some value in changing that.
Okay. That's one vote for. Anybody else against?
I'm not against, but I just want to say I'm not sure I agree with Paul on that. It was a former FERCer. I'm not sure we called them as public participants, as user commoners or stakeholders, but I don't really care.
Okay. All right. I thought that's what his email said. If I'm misrepresenting that, I apologize. I certainly like public participants better than, did you say commoners?
Commenters or parties.
Oh, commenters. Okay. I thought you meant, I thought I heard common. Oh, there he is. Paul, how are you, sir? Mr. Verchinsky? Paul, you there? We've been talking about you. Your ears burning? All right. All right. Well, maybe he'll chime in. Okay. So
Judge McLean, if anyone has, I mean, if there's an issue, because I think the statute does use the term stakeholders. So I don't know if that was a reason why that language was used in the in the draft. I mean,
it's just kind of what I've been using. So again, I'm not married to it. I mean, yeah, you're correct, Mr. Auslander, that or OPC Jake, that it does refer to a transparent stakeholder participation. I mean, I'm sure we could. I don't think it's a huge deal if we went with public participants or public participation. Paul, you there, sir? Paul? All right, go ahead, Ethan.
Hi, I just clarification. So,
yes, sir.
In my mind, we're all stakeholders of some sort or another, and I'm assuming that public participant means someone who is not associated with a particular organization. Is that the differentiation we're making here?
Paul.
Yeah, I'm on. I had some difficulty getting on.
No problem. We've been talking about you, and you wanted to suggest changing stakeholders to public participation or public participants.
Yes, that's correct, because we're looking at stakeholders very differently in the planning process, in my opinion. That is, anyone can get involved with the process. And that includes folks that, are euphemistically characterized as ratepayers. I happen not to like that very much. The thinking has always been, well, stakeholders only belong to organizations. That is not necessarily the case anymore, at least from what I'm seeing in this planning process. It wants to be opened up to everyone, and I think a change in nomenclature is in order.
Okay. So it's essentially just it's broader than stakeholder in a nutshell.
Yes, it is.
Okay.
Very much so.
Okay. And I know I don't know if you heard Jacob from OPC had noted that the statute does refer to transparent stakeholder process, but I don't think it's a massive deal if we change it. Jacob, go ahead. PHI Jake.
Yeah. And I know we had some of these discussions in the stakeholder subgroup a little bit as well around what that reflects. And I think one of the things we identified in the subgroup in some of those discussions was that OPC is one of their roles as an organization is to represent the residential customers. And so fully recognizing, Paul, your point that, the level of engagement certainly evolving and expanding, as things change and who looks to be engaged. And I guess I just wonder is trying to identify what's the right word that accurately reflects capturing both individual participants or individual participants that are participating through OPC as well as organizations. And I don't know if this is something that, just again, thinking on the fly here, is this something that we just pick a term and then define how we mean that term, right? If we use stakeholder, define stakeholder to mean both organizations and participants, or, just something like that versus trying to pick a word that we think reflects it and assume people will accurately interpret how we're representing that. So just a thought as we're talking through this here.
Okay.
Oh, well, my thinking on this is that if you name something differently, you're making a break from the previous way of doing business. And hence my suggestion that we turn to public participation. I fully recognize that OPC represents generally the ratepayers, but individuals may want to get involved with what is now going on at the PSC and the utilities, at least in my opinion anyway.
And we have had cases, certainly not the norm, where we have individuals that intervene in rate cases and represent themselves. So it's certainly not unheard of. Ethan, Jacob, do you guys have a heartburn one way or the other? I could try if we go to public participants or public participation, and then maybe throw in a footnote saying how it's broader than stakeholder, which is typically or has been something associated with a specific organization. Do you guys have heartburn over that?
I think dropping it to a footnote is a good idea. And whether you drop it to a footnote by defining stakeholder as including other public participants or doing it the other way. I do agree with Paul's point that I think stakeholder might be perceived on some level as being a more narrow range of interest than a lot of the participation that we hope will be facilitated by this process. So I think that was, what I was getting at, that, there might be some benefit in just recognizing that the interests are not as, limited as they are in other commission mediated proceedings.
Okay. All right. Anybody have Oh, go ahead, Al.
Yeah, sorry, it's still slow. Yeah, I'm just looking at a couple of definitions of stakeholder. Oxford Dictionary says it's a person with an interest or concern in something. So that's pretty broad. And another definition is a party that has interest in an endeavor or a company, whatever, and can either affect or be affected by the business. And that includes, it's broken down to include customers as well as owners, communities, partners, managers, employees, public agencies, etc. So I think that the stakeholder term is broad enough if we define it appropriately. I don't disagree with Paul's point that we need to think differently, but if we actually define it the way we mean it, that would be helpful. I am a little concerned and appreciate, I guess it was Jacob Berlin's point, that the language says, the legislative language says stakeholders, and we might want to align with that.
Okay. So, I mean, I could certainly, if we wanted to go that way and just make it explicitly clear that stakeholder goes beyond what has, I guess, traditionally been interpreted as an organization, so that it would specifically include public participants. I don't know if that gets to where you want to go, Paul.
Well, my suggestion is that a change in terminology with a change in the process is warranted in this particular case.
Okay. All right. That's fine. All right. I know OPC said you guys didn't have a huge dog in this fight. Anybody from Exelon or the utilities, or anyone have a huge issue one way or the other?
I don't think there's a huge issue. I think we'd agree with OPC of, just adding some type of footnote clarifying of, even if we're doing public participant, that reflects both organizational and individual participation.
I mean, maybe one way, if, just trying to please everybody here, maybe drop some kind of a footnote in, and then throughout the report where it's appropriate, do something like stakeholder / public participant or public participation.
I would be fine with that.
Okay. I'm just trying to split the baby here.
Okay.
All right. All right. Okay. I'll try and do that then. All right. Participant. Okay. With a footnote. All right. Moving on. All right. The next issue I wanted to touch on was, all right, the metrics language. I think I missed the mark. I'm 0 for 2 on this. I feel like the old Bugs Bunny cartoons where I keep swinging and missing at the softball here. So Al had suggested some language. Do we think that Al captured what we want to say in the in relation to the metrics and the reporting? Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think overall I'm pretty much in agreement with how Al rephrased it.
Okay. Okay. Anybody else?
I would agree.
Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Al.
Yeah, thanks. Just a question. I think you were going to run that concept by the other working group leaders. Not that we were asking them to. We were looking to them to see whether the metrics that we were coming up with were consistent with their thinking, whether they would be useful to them or whether they'd modify them in some way. Did you hear back from them?
Sure. Yeah, I did. Well, I heard back from everyone but Fred Kelly, who was on leave. Let's see. Where is that? Yeah, UCB. All right. Let's see. Just give me 1 second. Let me find it. Okay, so this is what the work group leaders said, again, with the exception of Fred Kelly. They agreed that the other programs need to be able to function independently of DSP. And essentially that we shouldn't be dictating what is needed in Power, for example. While the work group leaders agreed that there can be coordination with the DSP work group, it's not feasible for there to be a single one-stop shop for metrics. In the event the DSP work group needs a specific metric, it should be proposed, developed, and reported within our work group. And they recommended that there be discussion between our work group and the respective other work group that's going to be impacted when developing the metrics, especially when using assumptions that originate in a different docket. Additionally, the development of data that informs the DSP process should come up through the respective work group channels.
That sounds like a pretty that sounds consistent with what we're saying. I don't think that we were proposing that we would take over the reporting function for their working groups,
Right.
but we would share. I mean, I think this process of actually working together on specific metrics that are, for example, EV specific. That's sort of what we were proposing. I think I'm not sure anyone objected to that. I think the question comes down to if they own the metric on EV, for example, we all agree that it sits the DSP purpose as well as the EV working group's purpose, or we have two indicators, one that's more there related and one that's more related to DSP, but that they wouldn't have to be reported, even if the reporting cycles are not the same, they wouldn't have to be reported twice. Within any one reporting period, the value for that metric would belong to both groups. And then there's still this idea that I think Tim and others and OPC and all are talking about, which is that that metric would be incorporated into a DSP report that includes some DSP specific only metrics, as well as some that are shared with other working groups, but they're in one place. I think that's sort of what we're trying to get to.
Okay. All right. Give me 1 second, Tim. Jacob.
Yeah, just going back to the original question around Al's language, I think, and maybe I'm just misreading it or something, but I think your original language better reflected the joint Exxon Utilities position of that. These are DSP isn't the only working group that is driving Maryland towards accomplishing its CSNA goals, and that those other working groups, are also, responsible for supporting that to in some capacity, and that these metrics should be referred to those groups for consideration in their metrics reporting, and not necessarily having them as shared metrics, but rather that those would be recommendations coming from our working group that those working groups consider to incorporate their data. I believe that was what our recommendation was, and I think your original language reflected that, and I guess I wasn't quite clear that Al's adjustments reflected that.
Okay, quick question before. So I get, we're working on an EV metric for our purposes. We should refer that to the EV work group. And when they come up with a metric, should we then include it in the DSP report?
No, it would just be reported in those existing avenues of
Okay,
reporting.
all right. I just wanted to make sure I understood your position. So that's where you and Al differ. All right, Tim.
Yeah, just real quick. I think, I think I kind of agree that I don't know that I like the word like a shared metric. I think that, and I like the way this is put, that's like, we'd be providing the other work group with a recommendation for what kind of metrics we would like to see, and we'd like to work with them to achieve that metric and hopefully agree upon the metric with them. and that it remains tracked by the other work group and utilized in our report for DSP metrics. But yeah, I think I probably agree with Jacob that the term shared metric might not be quite the right.
Okay, yeah, okay. So so you sound like you're more in Al's camp on this issue.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, all right. Yeah, shared metric may have been maybe I don't know if I use that, but yeah, I get what you're saying. All right, DeAndre.
I think
DeAndre, if you're talking, we can't hear you. All right, we'll come back. Paul.
Yeah, I'm basically in Al's camp on this, and I've been on the EV work group. There's some metrics that we've developed, and those metrics, to the extent that they've been okayed by those work groups, should be automatically included in the DSP. However, this is going to be an ongoing process, and we may, as a DSP, suggest, I think rightly so, metrics that will help the CSNA to be implemented. I kind of look at that as a two-way street. Now, what I do not know is whether the other groups that are working have developed any metrics. I know that that's been going on in the EV work group, but I have no idea whether people have done any of that. Can anybody speak to that, I guess, is my question.
I know I cannot. I know we got some folks who participate in several work groups. Anybody? And now, are you talking strictly to the Climate Solutions Now Act, or?
Well, I'm talking about metrics that they use for measuring progress.
Okay.
At least that's, what the intent of metrics always is.
Sure. Okay. All right. All right. Anybody? All right. I take your son. Yeah, go ahead, Ethan.
Yeah. We do have, and I'm not familiar with the reporting, but we do reference in our comments on the metrics the EV reports that we do, and they do include metrics for installs and the kind of information that's been developed in the EV work group. So there is reporting.
Right, but are you aware
And
of
it's metrics.
Yeah, okay. So aside from EV metrics, are you aware of any other metrics or any other work groups that have developed something similar? Or
I know there's some interconnection reporting. There's, and we reference the reliability reports, the annual reliability reports, and our position is that these are existing proceedings, and there's a context and a group of SMEs that are familiar with them in those proceedings, and that yes, that it's good for us to develop new metrics that we think are important for the CSNA goals here, but those should be referred to the appropriate group to make sure that they vet them and design them in such a way that they are meaningful to the people who actually will be getting hands-on with them.
okay, understood. All right, DeAndre, you there? All right. All right. Anybody else on this metric issue? I will try for a third time to accurately get this. Again, I apologize for misconstruing this.
If there are not metrics in these other groups, then I think it's fully within the DSP purview to suggest those. That gives them a starting point. Otherwise, without context, you can't really do these.
Right. Yeah. No, I think everybody's on board with referring the metrics to the appropriate work group. It sounds to me more who should be reporting on those metrics. Should it be the EV work group reporting on their metrics, and we also include those in whatever reports that are DSP related? That's what I'm getting. Is that, Al, is that your understanding?
Yeah, that's my understanding. And I just wanted to say
Okay.
that I wasn't trying to rewrite Jacob's point. I think the difference between ours, mine, whoever's it is, and what the Exxon Utilities put forward is whether there should be a consolidated report or not.
Right. Yeah.
That's the difference. So I wasn't trying to rewrite theirs. Their position is no. Our position is yes, basically. But in terms of this consultative process and so on and so forth, I think we're all on board.
Yeah, I think everybody's on board with the consultation, but the no camp doesn't want to include all those metrics that are applicable to other specific work groups into a DSP report.
Exactly right. But the good news is they wouldn't have to report them. They wouldn't have to go through the process of calculating the value of the metric twice.
Right.
They'd only do it once whenever it's done.
No, I got it. Yeah. I like how you phrase that. The good news. All right. All right. Anybody else on metrics? Yes, go ahead, DeAndre.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, sir.
All right. Thanks, Chuck. Based on my interpretation of PPRP's response, I think that kind of ties back to what I was saying before when it comes to the metrics, that we have to make sure what we're asking to be reported or included ties into the principles that are outlined for the DSP process. These other work groups are working and trying to accomplish their own particular goals, which we're all supposed to have synergy. But particularly, what if they're working on so much that they're asking for specific information that we feel is necessitated to be provided in the DSP? I agree with Jacob in regards to kind of referencing these other work groups when it comes to particular information that's needed in regards to DSP process. But overall, if there is specific information, that overall summary information that, for instance, the electric vehicle work group can provide us, that satisfies goal number 1, which is measures to decrease greenhouse gas emissions incident to electric distribution, including high levels of distributed energy resources in electric vehicles, then knows that information specifically that they can provide that can make sure that the DSP process or DSP plan is reaching that particular goal, or whichever other number of goals that coincide or correlate with these 12 that we've been given as a principle for DSP planning. I don't know if that made sense, or
I think so. It sounds like you're more in Al's camp.
Or
are you
more so? Yeah, I mean, we've got to be more specific about the information that we want these other groups to detail in this DSP plan report.
Right. Well. So all right. So EV. So we come up with this great EV metric that we think is great. We refer it to the EV work group. All right. So what in your mind happens from there?
They can provide that specific information for that specific metric that we've created that will pretty much summarize what it is that we're looking to provide in the DSP plan.
Sure. And then the EV work group would report on that metric. And then, we would also, the DSP work group or the utilities, whoever follows the report, they would also include that information on that particular metric.
The EV work group would provide more in-depth information as to how that data was was arrived.
Right. And then would the DSP reports also include that information, but just, I guess, on a more general scale? Is that your?
Yeah, it
Okay.
could. Yes, it could provide that information on a more general scale.
Okay, so that sounds like what Al is saying.
It's kind of what Al and Jacob are saying. Like, we want to reference the other reports or the other work groups for more detail, but an overall metric, we can ask for that information and for it to be provided in DSP.
Right, and just so I'm clear, you're referring to OPC, Jacob, or
no, PHI's Jacob. I'm sorry. Where we're going to reference that work group or that report that provides more in-depth information as to how that the metric data has been derived.
All right. So now I'm confused. All right.
Okay. Sorry.
No, you're fine. I want to make sure I got this, because the way it makes it sound is you're agreeing with Al and Jacob, but they have two different positions.
Okay. So for a DSP report, right, there are going to be the DSP report is a pretty much overall summary of a utility's plan to reach its, to satisfy the clean energy goals. However, that utility particularly plans on making that happen, while also providing reliability and quality service for its customers. Within each plan, within parts of those plans will be, let's say, energy storage, for instance. The energy storage work group has particular mechanisms and other types of things that they are creating in that work group in order to create a program for energy storage to satisfy that statute. The overall and an individual company's overall plan is kind of tailored by that work group, that program, but it's not exactly the same. This particulars as to how that program work can be referenced by that work group's report. But the overall goal, the overall plan that a company may have in order to reach its goals can be provided in the DSP plan. More specific information as to the mechanisms, how they were created, what those mechanisms are, what those programs are, may be found in the other energy storage report. So when Jacob says we can reference these other reports, those other reports have been doing more work in that space. So we'll definitely see more details as to how those programs work, how they were created, and what those mechanisms are. The DSP overall plan can tell you how those mechanisms are being used for a utility to reach its overall plan. Okay.
Okay. All right. I'm with you now. Ethan, I'll come to you just a second. Jacob, since you're getting PHI, Jake. Is DeAndre, is he correctly understanding your position? Because if he is, it sounds like we might.
And sorry, I'm kind of just shifting around a little bit. I'm at a Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
No, you're good.
Event supporting junior achievement and a job shadow day, so I'm to shift around technology-wise a little bit. I think what he's saying, I don't know if it fully reflects it, at least as I was hearing it, I was trying to listen in. I think I agree with DeAndre in the sense of the metric should really be focused around how we're achieving the CSNA goals. I think many of the goal or some of the metrics kind of overlap and connect with existing metrics that are reported in the small generator report, in the annual reliability report, in the semi-annual EV metrics report. There's a lot of overlap and connection to the existing metrics. And I think our recommendation is that those metrics be passed along to the groups that are responsible for those reports. Right. They're the SMEs that can really evaluate, are these the appropriate metrics? And I think our recommendation is that they they stay in those existing reports. Because if someone is interested in looking at EV metrics, they'll go to the semi-annual report, reliability and the reliability report, etc. And any metrics that are reported within DSP should be very hyper specific to distribution system planning, right? And I think the acknowledgement is that achieving the CSNA goals is a broad effort, and I think that is something that then can be supported across the spectrum.
Okay, so with DeAndre, it sounds like you keep the specific metric with like the EV work group, but in the DSP report, maybe you don't reference as much that specific metric, but you're more of a general, in the EV section, for example, they've got EV work groups got this metric, and we've progressed this much towards making it through doing X, Y, and Z for distribution planning. Is more of a general sense. Is that
is
that acceptable, or is that?
I think that's something in terms of like from a narrative form, talking through of like how are we working to implement the CSNA goals, and I do want to make sure we're talking about the 12 CSNA policy goals of how we're evolving DSP, right, and separating that from the broad climate goals that are within CSNA, which I think are a broader thing. I think on those 12 policy CSNA goals, I think it makes sense within a utilities report to have some narrative section around how is that being achieved, how is that being incorporated, and that may reference those other metrics. But I'll say the metrics that were discussed within the subgroup and within this are very more of those kind of targeted metrics targeted towards specific things. And so I guess what we had discussed and what we're kind of talking about here now at the end around this more kind of general form, I think they're slightly different versions of where we've been.
Right. I would agree. Not saying it's bad. Al, yep, I was coming to you, sir.
Yeah, I think we've elided a little bit from a discussion of metrics into a discussion of the broader aspects of reporting, and also DeAndre was referring to planning. Those are obviously, metrics are only a part of the process, but metrics are by definition things that can be measured. So there's having a narrative and all those other things actually usually accompanies metrics that are reported and goes beyond the specific measurement. But the idea of the metric is that we agree on a particular thing that if we track it over time, we can understand whether things are moving in the right direction or not. And so those are the things that we would want to coordinate with the other groups, maybe use the same metric. Shared may not be the right word, but use the same metric that they've already established, as in the reliability report where they do SAIDI and so on and so forth. Or we might want to have something that's more related to that aspect as it connects to DSP. And if it's their metric, the only thing we're saying is that whether it's incorporated by reference or whatever, it actually, when we each year or whatever the reporting cycle is, look at progress in DSP, we include those metrics from interconnection, from EVs, from storage, whatever, to give us a picture of whether the distribution system is evolving in the way that meets the requirements. The metrics supposedly are the way of judging the plan. The plan is what takes us there. The metric is telling us whether we're getting there or not. So there will be a reporting cycle on progress against plan, and in that report include metrics as well as narrative.
Okay. Okay. I'm with you. And it sounds like that's kind of what DeAndre is saying. Jacob, you there, sir?
Yep.
All right. So any thoughts on what Al just said?
Again,
And if you guys want to maintain your current position, I'm fine with that. I just want to
yeah,
make sure
and I
I
think
understand.
I think in general align with our, still with our current position. I think even within that current position, we've said if there are distribution system planning specific metrics that, obviously they would fit in here. As they don't have an existing home, right? There's not an existing report
Right,
capturing
yeah,
them. So those make sense.
I think everybody agrees with that.
Yeah.
I think it's really just how to treat other metrics that impact the statutory requirements and how they impact the utilities progress towards meeting those goals. I think that's really all we're talking about.
Yeah, and I think we would kind of keep that current position of, at least the metrics as they were kind of laid out within the metric subgroup.
Mhm.
The metrics that have been discussed, that those are better fit in other avenues.
Okay. To the extent there's no overlap, is that fair?
What do you mean? I just want to make sure.
Okay, maybe not overlap. I don't want to use shared again, but I don't know. I can't come up with a good term right now that's not shared or the same metric. But the utilities want to essentially focus on the metrics that were discussed in the subgroup. And anything beyond that should be kept with the respective work group, and the utilities could incorporate it by reference in your annual reports. Question mark.
I think just again thinking through some of the metrics that we talked through in the subgroup, there were some that were grid related metrics that
Sure.
may not have a home in an existing report.
Mhm.
But for example, how many customers are participating in EV managed charging, right? That is a managed charging program in the EV working group that is reported in the semi-annual report. That's best left and captured there.
Okay.
And even if there's a metric that is adjacent to that metric, for example, that would also best fit in the EV working group.
Okay. All right. Understood. I get it. Ethan, I'm sorry, sir. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Jacob covered it. We got there.
All right. I think I got it. Again, I will make a third attempt on this. All right. Anybody else on this particular issue before we move on? All right. Mark, are you there, sir? Oh, wait, somebody just raised their hand. Matt?
Yeah, Mark is he's on another different meeting right now, so I'll be kind of taking his place if you're looking for Mark from PE.
Okay, yeah. He had raised a couple questions. I don't know if you're familiar with him, sir.
Vaguely, yeah, I may be able to provide some insight.
All right, so you know what? I was practicing, so I'm going to try and share my screen here. No, that's, of course, it's not. All right, I probably didn't do well. Let's see. PE's draft. Give me 1 second here. All right. All right. Everybody see that? Anyone?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So if you can see Mark's comment on this, on storage metrics, he wanted to discuss this in the EV metrics as maybe we don't have a consensus on this.
Yeah, so I did have a discussion with Mark, and some of the things that we're looking here is some of that information we don't currently capture.
Okay.
One thing we need to make sure is that, this would be things moving forward. And the other is some of these storage facilities, if we've got a a small storage that goes in at a customer residence, we may not necessarily be made aware of that unless it's being paired with solar or something of that nature. So it would be things that we could report on that we were made aware of.
Okay, so I could throw, I mean, to the extent we don't have you don't have an issue with the metrics as they are, I could certainly throw in language to the extent that, to the extent this utility, this information's, it can be obtained or captured by the utility. Would that kind of address the issue?
Yeah, that makes sense. The same thing with the co-located EV with charging infrastructure. We may not necessarily be made aware of that coming unless it was paired with solar or a net meter or something of that nature.
Okay. All right. Okay. That could potentially be an easy fix. Go ahead, David.
I just wanted to point out as regards to the co-located with EV charging, the Drive Act, does specifically say that, connecting, Ford selling, in injecting will require a interconnection. So therefore, that type of storage will have to be recognized.
Okay. All right.
Yes, absolutely. And moving forward, with FERC 2222 and those types of things, that will be required. However, there could be a EV with battery that's not selling back that we wouldn't be aware of.
Okay. All right. All right. So I think this, anybody else? Yes, go ahead, Ethan.
I just like to point out that this discussion exactly is to our point why these should be referred to the SMEs in the appropriate work groups, because we are not necessarily experts in everything, even in our utilities all the nuances. And that's why we feel that these are best kept to the reporting and the work groups that are appropriate to the particular metric being reported, because otherwise we're losing context. We're not sure, there is confusion over who actually controls the data. This is exactly the kind of confusion that we are trying to avoid with our recommendation, which I'd like to point out we have also found has generally been a practice in other grid modernization proceedings that we've reviewed. So,
okay. It's a best practice.
I shy away from that term.
I know, I was kidding. Tim.
No, I think I agree. I don't remember which group this would have specifically fallen under in terms of like reference or recommending to them, but no, I think I agree with Ethan that to the extent that the SMEs and the appropriate working group can help us to hone these into metrics that are actually deliverable would be great.
Okay. All right, great. All right. I think so that was Mark's issue on EV and storage metrics. And like I said, Matt, I can throw in something, I don't want to say disclaimer, but something that references to the extent the utility has the information available or can capture it.
And also then if you scroll down to the EV metrics while we're there.
All right. Okay.
So obviously we have information for our EV charger pilot programs. However, on specific chargers that are installed throughout the utility that are not utility owned, we don't currently have that information. And as far as some of the details that are there, the capacity installed, number of chargers, those types of things. We look at the amount of load that they're requesting and study that, but we wouldn't necessarily have all the details, for those installations. So that would be something new if we would be required to. I would think that would be housed or better represented by a different group rather than the utility. But as of now, we don't have that available to us.
Okay. All right. Let's see. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, the I understand where PE is coming from. One of the major issues we had in the electrification study was the lack of data availability from the utilities. We tried to drill down on, particularly, I was in the heat pump working group, and we were trying to make an analysis of folks that currently had heat pumps but had electric resistance heating as the backup. And we could get basically little or no information on that, with the exception of SMECO, who did in fact have that information. It was at a much higher order, and we're going to have to be drilling down in order to do demand management, a whole host of issues that deal with FERC 2222 and aggregation. I mean, you need more definitive data in order to make some rational decisions on how you go forward in various orders and proceedings. Without having good data, everybody's going to be in trouble: the utilities, the PSC, and the customers. So, I'm always firmly in favor of additional data that can be used to get us to where we need to go in the CS&A. Thanks.
All right. Thank you, sir. Ethan, go ahead, sir. Ethan?
Talking into a muted mic again. We just want to make sure we did send out in our final metrics comments our points to the footnote 42 there, and that we don't have access to all of the data. So just want to make sure that will be incorporated in the final.
Okay,
version.
I will double check to make sure that it is.
But I'm sure we have another discussion coming up about the how we're finishing the report too, so we'll cover more then.
Yeah, I figured that'd be the finale or the encore. Okay, go ahead, Al.
Yeah, just not to, the horse is almost dead, so I don't want to beat it too much. But in terms of these recommendations, that all these specifics that we're talking about, it seems to me these are, we're not going to put to the commission in the report the proposal that these exact metrics are what we're suggesting they adopt, right? Because we're going to suggest that this process of consultation, which has not actually completely happened yet, these are draft metrics that are coming from us, but the next step in the process will be this negotiation with the other groups to identify, to respond to some of, for example, the questions that Matt and Mark brought up, so that we actually end up with something that is workable and makes sense, drawing on the expertise of that other group. Ultimately, again, our position is ultimately they would be included in a DSP comprehensive report, but we're not proposing that. I just want to get it clear what this report is going to say about this set of metrics, because we're not proposing these are the actual final draft, but that the next step would be that negotiation process. Is that correct?
Go ahead, Jacob.
I was just going to say, I agree with Al, and I think we had included that in the document Ethan had mentioned in terms of our most recent update of tweaking it to say recommending these metrics for consideration by those other working groups. Because I agree, I think, Al, I think that referencing to the other working groups for consideration and support was a universal piece that the working group landed on, and then the disagreements just where they ultimately get reported. So just want to say, I think I agree with Al on having the language reflect that.
Right, and I will, Jacob, I do recall there were at least 2 or 3 specific references I can recall off the top of my head where joint Exelon utilities made that specific recommendation. Al, did you want to say something, sir?
No. So I mean, I think Jacob just said it really. I
Okay.
think we basically agree on where
Right.
we are
Okay.
in this
All right.
process, and the only disagreement is about whether there's a single, not a single report,
Okay.
but a consolidated report, but that incorporates
Gotcha.
all of them. All right.
All right. Sounds good. All right. I think we're on the same page on this one. All right. Matt, are you good, sir?
I am. Thank you.
All right. Okay. And again, the changes that I made on this issue, they'll definitely be highlighted, or actually on every issue that'll be highlighted, the material changes. All right. Moving on, next item. Let's see. There were a couple very minor issues where I didn't have a specific recommendation for whatever reason. I don't think either of these issues were really contested. But I certainly don't want to throw, let's see, where is that time of use? Come on. Watch me do this. Where is this stupid? All right. While I try and find this, does anybody have any issues with time of use and dynamic pricing? I think they were consensus items, but again, I didn't have a recommendation and I wasn't comfortable just throwing something in. Where is this? Let's see. No, I can't. Yeah, okay, so now these are the drafts. Are either of these issues the time of use dynamic programs, pricing programs? And again, I'm working off of PE's draft comments here. Are either of these issues problems for folks?
Are we still in metrics?
No, what? All right, so I'm looking at the most up-to-date draft of my draft. Now we're on, let's see, this is, well, it's grid management metrics, okay? So we have partial consensus. Am I making more work for myself? So I just don't have a recommendation or positions on these two issues for folks. Time of use and dynamic pricing programs and EV charging programs. Whereas I have, for everything, for the item right above it, we've got a specific recommendation.
Well, once again, time of use and dynamic pricing we would say should be referred to the rates work group, and EV charging to the EV charging work group.
Okay, and that's fine. I just I can come up with something on that.
And just for those who haven't been paying attention, the Drive Act, which came out a couple of weeks ago, we're still digesting it, but it does have direct a program, the utilities to create time of use programs for some that I'm not real familiar with it, but
right. Among
Drive
other
Act is changing a lot of the landscape very quickly.
Yep, and I'm sure we'll be meeting on some issues as it relates to DSP on that issue as well. All right. Everybody okay with the recommendation to refer these to the appropriate work group?
Yeah, I believe so.
Excellent.
I'm good.
Very good. All right. Okay, so then let's see. Al had two suggestions. Let me pull up his comments. There were, where's OPC? All right. there were two sections that I had questions on towards the end. One was additional roles for stakeholders. I wasn't entirely sure if we should keep it by itself. Here we go. Al had suggested throwing this under the utility straw man, as it kind of relates to participation. Does anyone have any suggestions? Agreement, disagreement? Keep it where it is?
I mean, I think I agree. I think that it would nest well under the process.
Okay. All right. Jacob, Ethan, since the suggestion was to move it towards the under the utility straw man, and hopefully I can make it flow. Do you guys have any objection to that?
Sounds fine to me.
Okay. All right. Would the same then be true of, let's see, where is the document I'm sharing? Of the expectations for, let's see. Okay, here we go. Al and Tim had comments on this. Let's see. Again, Tim had suggested moving it to the utility straw man area, but I didn't want to do that without at least touching base with utilities. Any issue or concern with that?
Not a problem.
Okay. All right, very good. I think the last one I had was Ethan and Jacob, PHI Jacob, you had suggested moving some of the non-consensus issues in the level of granularity section to data sources. And I think I may have sent that around to folks. Let's see. Let me find it. I thought I sent it.
You did send it out.
All right.
Either yesterday or the day before.
All right. Yeah, I'm looking. All right. Okay, there we go. Let me just give me 1 second here. I'll pull it up. I'm not getting any props for my progress on Zoom, on sharing documents. All right. All right, let's see. Oh, go ahead, Paul.
Let me get my mic on here. I read over what the utilities wanted to do to put it under data sources, and I frankly do not agree with that.
Okay.
And I don't agree with it for the following reason. Everything that we've talked about with what the utilities are currently doing is based on granularity way down at the circuit and transformer level. And for that particular reason, I think that granularity, which is of concern to everybody, needs to be specifically laid out and not subsumed in data sources.
Okay.
I think it needs to be very much up front. So
Okay.
that's my reasoning on this one.
Very good. All right. Let's see. Tim, wasn't sure who went first there. Tim, Jacob?
Jacob grabbed it first, so
All right.
I'll let him go.
Yeah, and hopefully can provide a little context of what our thought there was. Sure. The level of granularity box there was, that's in box one, right? Which is what considerations feed into the planning process. And so as I was reading through that section, I think, Judge, you were really kind of capturing the conversation of the working group during that meeting. And what I noticed was the conversation certainly started with levels of granularity and what level of granularity do utilities need to be getting to. And I think part of that section absolutely documents that conversation around, whether it's feeder level, substation level, when is AMI data used, et cetera. But then that conversation during that working group meeting, and as it was captured, started to dive into more what level of access should stakeholders have to the utility data, and what data are stakeholders interested in within that data. So, and those were the sections of that conversation that I felt better fit with the data scope and access conversation, which to me is more about what data do folks have access to, what is the scope of that, versus levels of granularity, which is more to me about what levels of data are the utilities using in that planning process. And so that was just trying to recognize that just in the flow of the conversation during that working group, we dive-tailed a little bit out of the granularity and into data and access, and just trying to reflect that back to where it made better fit.
Okay. Yeah. And you're not suggesting getting rid of the language entirely, just moving it. So
correct.
All right. Tim, go ahead, sir.
I think I actually pretty much agree with Jacob. I think in my first read through as well, I kind of highlighted that, but didn't want to recommend a whole organizational change. But
you're not going to hurt my feelings, Tim. Believe me.
Well, I think
you're going to have to try harder than just recommending reorganization stuff.
But I mean, it was also a little bit of just a lift problem too. But yeah, I think I agree that I think there are kind of two different pieces there of the level of granularity specifically towards what depth or what level of granularity that these processes need to work with. And then there's the question of what level of granularity stakeholders need in participating in this process. And I think that they did a pretty good job of pulling those pieces out that are more stakeholder engagement related. And I think it does make sense to move those to the other section. So I think in general, I'm in agreement with the move. Again, yeah, recognizing that we're not getting rid of those, but rather, and that they'd probably just be better. It's more contextual in that other section, I think.
All right. Okay. All right. All right. Anybody else want to weigh in on this? All right. Those were all the issues, at least from the comments, that I wanted to address that I wasn't able to get answered, that I didn't raise specifically with the commenters. Does anybody else have any questions, not necessarily on timing issues, but does anybody else have anything else they want to address in terms of the draft report that we haven't touched on already?
I believe you may have skipped over number 4, which is overseas.
Yes, I'm sorry.
All right. No, it's fine.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you bringing that up.
I didn't know if it was purposeful.
You hurt my feelings. That's why. So that's your payback.
Yeah, if you want to tackle that one, I think this is just a point of, I think there was kind of some consensus here, and if we can get another point of consensus, I think it's beneficial. But I think what we got to at the end was that, the preferred nomenclature here is hosting capacity maps and load capacity maps. And I think we all agreed on that. I think there was agreement, and kind of looking to the utilities to weigh in on this, but I think there was agreement that the utilities should all be publishing a load capacity map eventually. Not necessarily today, but eventually they should be working towards a load capacity map. And I think OPC's kind of where we got to on our recommendation with that one is basically that we'd like it to be clear what each of those maps applies to, and so or how they would be applied to a for example, hosting capacity map, how it applies to solar versus like battery exports, and making sure that like making it explicit that like if it's in you know, in say like the, you know, the opening page to the map, that, you know, this map and the like values herein are applicable to a PV or a, you know, battery storage exporting battery storage facility or something to that effect, just to make sure that it's clear that the values are applicable to those resources.
Okay. All right. All right. Thanks, Tim. Utilities have any follow-up or reaction to Tim's comments? Maybe we can agree on this issue. Ethan, Jacob, there we go.
Yeah, so, sorry, just thinking. I think, and so Tim, I'm trying to remember back to that conversation, and frankly, I'm not remembering. So are you just saying, because obviously at least PHI, we're one that does have the hosting capacity map and an existing EV load capacity map. So are you reflecting more just changing the language within the maps to just accurately better articulate what each of those maps represent for customers?
Yeah, I think that's true. And also just thinking through if there's any like specifics that would change. I mean, like, yeah, I'd like for the maps to say, you know, that this can be applied to EVs or battery storage in terms of load. But I think also in doing that, the utility should think through any like potential concerns there of like, I mean, you probably are less likely to have this on the load side of like timing, but like my specific thought of this is when you look at like the hosting capacity maps, a lot of times the PV hosting capacity is going to be based off of a PV profile. And so it's not going to be looking at like the minimum load at 2 a.m. It's only going to be looking at the minimum load at 2 p.m. And so if there's a difference there, in terms, and that's effectual to how much battery storage like charging battery storage export could be carried on the grid, then like the utility should think through that. But insofar as like they believe that the maps are applicable to both, I think that the maps should the literature with the map, or like the, you know, the like explanation of the map and the data contained in it should be clear that, you know, it is applicable to, you know, whatever DER types.
Gotcha. I think we'd have to take that back. Obviously, I think we had put the position, again, I'm just trying to remember back to both reading the report and the last meeting. I think we had the position of we're unsure of the value of the battery hosting capacity map, but I hear what you're saying in terms of that structure and stuff. I think that would just have to be take back.
Okay. All right. Thanks, Jacob. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, I think we would need to do the same with the battery storage hosting capacity map. I'm trying to think of a reason that it would be beneficial to have a separate map, you know, as far as how battery storage would be selling onto the grid and things of that nature. My expectation would be they would probably be selling at the same time or during a peak time frame. So that minimum load is probably not for 2 a.m. probably isn't going to be applicable. Now, that's me not having a lot of experience with battery storage, but there is a battery storage working group. I would think that might be something they could take up.
Yeah, and to be clear, I actually don't. I agree. I don't think that we should be trying not to have a separate map. I think. I just think that it's useful for the utilities to think through whether or not there would be any reason for the load capacity or the PV capacity maps to not apply to those. And if there's no conflict there, then ideally the maps would list those like applicabilities.
All right. Thanks, guys. David.
I support what Tim is saying, and I think that there isn't a value to having some separation. I understand what the utilities are saying as far as lack of information, but I do think there should be an aspirational goal. But I do want to point out one factor is that I think that the assumption that storage will be operating on peak, I think is not a way it will be going into the future. In particular, I'm not saying we have a duck curve in Maryland or in PJM yet, but as you see more solar happening in midday, you'll probably start seeing a shift of charging of the storage during the day and then a discharge in the evening hours. So that I think the load pattern will change, and I think that should be reflected into the future.
All right. All right. Thank you, sir. Ethan.
My subject matter experts will have some more detailed conversation about it, but from a more of a operational point of view, I just wanted to say that I think that the kinds of maps that we put out there, we really need to be working. It's great for us all to discuss it amongst ourselves, but it's a conversation for developers to tell us what they're seeking, because these are expensive and difficult to generate, and we don't want to be making it for an audience of nobody. So we want to make sure that we're making a product that actually serves that particular group of customers, I would call them the interconnecting DER customers. So before we get prescriptive here, I would recommend that we make this more of a basically we need to have a discussion, say, in the energy storage work group and EV work groups about what do people want to see, because I'm not sure at the end of the day that we're actually serving a particular customer's needs with this. And I think one of my experts has something to say now.
Good morning, everyone. I think Ethan is trying to pull me out here. I won't say I'm an expert of any choice. This is Eric with the BG team. Thanks for covering that, Ethan. You did a great job just summarizing. And what I heard, I think from one of I think it was Mr. Catherine that mentioned this should be aspirational, as in a direction that we should be striving for, with an understanding that it's going to take a journey to potentially get to that point. But to Ethan's point, each areas, each function, right, whether it's the EV, whether it's the PV folks, may be looking for different sort of data, right? And I'm not sure if we collectively here have the expertise to even answer what's the data that is required for the folks who are actually developing the solutions for the grid, and working with the utilities, and if we have the information, the right tools to be able to provide some of what is being asked for there. So I go back to my crawl, walk, run approach to see if we could work through that in a methodical way, and identify what are the low-hanging fruits that we can get to, and continue to evolve and improve to get to the aspirational goals. But do understand the vision, right? But I think we work towards the vision, and we should be careful in trying to say that is what it should be tomorrow. Thanks.
Tim, do you have any follow-up to what David and the other folks have said? Is this something that we should make it more of an aspirational type goal or issue, and look, and I don't want to say punt, but get some input from the applicable working groups?
I mean, I recognize that this may just not be a consensus issue,
and that's fine too.
Because I mean, I think fundamentally what our ask is, like, it's basically to list. Yeah, I mean, I guess it is kind of aspirational, and so it's trying to making sure that the hosting capacity and load capacity maps are applicable to any type of DER resource. Yeah, and recognizing that they aren't necessarily right now, but trying to figure out how we get there.
Okay.
I mean, yeah, I think it's okay if this stays as a non-consensus item. I just
Fine.
saw that we were pretty close on it and thought maybe we'd get there, but
It's no problem at all. No, I appreciate the effort. Jacob, PHI Jake.
Yeah, and I think we had added this in our comments somewhere, and Judd, you had actually just kind of said something that reminded me of it. Is I think really the public-facing hosting capacity maps are really an interconnection working group topic, and really hosting capacity analysis is DSP. So to your point of like, this may be something that we recommend as a topic for the interconnection working group to tackle further. Just again, recognizing that DSP, more focused on planning, is around the hosting capacity analysis versus what the maps may be.
Okay.
yeah, that's a fair assessment also.
Okay. Fair assessment, but you're still sticking with your point, which is fine.
Yeah.
Okay. Excellent. That's fine. All right. And Tim, go ahead. Samantha.
Hi there. This is Sam or Samantha Weaver with the Coalition for Community Solar Access. And I apologize for jumping in and out of this call. I'm traveling today, so I'm having to multitask. But I heard some reference to wanting maybe some perspective from DER developers. And I'm only heard about 80% of this, but I did want to just echo what Tim, or maybe it was Jacob, said, which is that I think there are two use cases for hosting capacity analysis, right? One of them is a map that helps developers understand where suitable places to interconnect might look like, and I would tend to agree that maybe that's better suited for the interconnection group. However, there's an important second use case for hosting capacity analysis, which is figuring out on a forecast basis, so looking ahead, where do utilities anticipate that there will be hosting capacity constraints, and identifying that as a grid need and proposing potentially to proactively upgrade the grid as part of a distribution system plan in order to accommodate anticipated increases in hosting capacity. So long story short, hosting capacity analysis is important. We would love to see it forecasted. It doesn't have to be in a map, but would love to have that analysis so that it's factored into distribution planning going forward.
Okay, thank you, Sam. And don't go anywhere. You got a couple hands raised. Tim, and then Joyce.
No, I think that's a really good add. Thanks, Sam. And no, I echo that. I would agree. I do think to that point, I think we've tackled that pretty well in other sections of like both the forecasting as well as like needs assessment, talking about proactive hosting capacity needs. So I think we have mostly captured that in terms of the side of distribution system planning. And so yeah, I think to Jacob's earlier point that potentially the interconnection side of it is the maps.
Okay. All right. And Samantha agreed with you. So, Joyce.
Yeah, from Maryland Energy Administration. And so I understand that hosting capacity analysis is not exactly the same thing as a locational value study. But as I understand it, one of the reasons that my agency wanted the location of value was to know where we should be incentivizing DERs. And I think they're related. The experts can fill me in on how they are related, but that's my extra plug for that.
Okay. All right. Does that sound right, Samantha?
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and that's gosh, yeah, that's a complex topic because of course then in addition to knowing on a sort of geographical basis what's the value at a given location of installing a DER, there also needs to be some kind of incentive framework in place. And this is where my head starts to get scrambled a little bit around like, okay, we have MCAM now. How does that relate to the locational value of solar? But in general, I think there are a lot of other states that have assigned a locational value to solar as a way of incentivizing projects to be developed in the best places, quote unquote, for the grid, and so that we're building things most efficiently. So I think that's something we support in concept. I'm not sure that fits in exactly with distribution system planning, but it's something that I think is another important tool in the toolbox.
Okay. All right. All right. Thank you very much. All right. Anybody else? All right. Again, any issue that we haven't talked about in the draft report that I haven't covered or hasn't been covered yet that you'd like to talk about? All right. Seeing none. All right. So today's the 18th. Reports due on the 30th. Assuming I'm able to get this revised, make the revisions that we talked about today out to you either by end of today or first thing in the morning, is it possible to get me the revisions or any comments back by Wednesday the 24th or the 25th at the latest?
The 24th sounds very reasonable, Your Honor.
Excellent. Go ahead, Tim.
I think so. Yeah, assuming that we've got it. So yeah.
Okay. And like I said before, the big changes will be highlighted. It'll be bolded. It'll be italicized, so everybody will be able to see. I mean, please, if you're having trouble sleeping, go ahead, read the whole thing, because I'm sure it'll good cure for insomnia. But I'm highlighting the major changes that have been made based on the comments that I've received, and I'll again highlight the comments that have been made today. Yes, sir, Al.
Yeah, can I just, for my own sake, I guess, be clear that I've been bouncing all over the map, and so I may have missed something, but the version that you've been showing us pieces of today that's basically the first version that you sent out with all the different people's comments accumulated, right? We have not seen an intermediate version. Is that correct?
No, sir. No, sir. No, I've literally been working on this, since ever I got all the comments. So the versions you were seeing today it was, when we were talking about your comments, it was your comments and OPC's comments overlaid on one document. So that was not my document.
Okay, good. So then the next thing we'll see will be the accumulation of all the things.
Right, you'll see
done and that we have talked about today. Okay, great.
Correct.
Great.
All right. Anybody else? Okay, all right. So I will try and get this out as soon as possible. If you have any issues, questions, or concerns, just let me know. Jacob, Ethan, I know you guys, and Matt, I know you said there may be some follow-up on, I think, that OPC's issue about the maps. To the extent you've got any updates, let me know. If not, I'll just go with what we talked about today and what your recommendation is currently, because I don't really think that it's significantly changed. So, all right, with that, thank you for a quick meeting, and go ahead, Tim.
No, I was going to just say thank you.
Oh, all right, thanks. Yes, Ethan.
Before we adjourn, just wanted to, you and John Borkowski in the interconnection meeting mentioned too, there is now stirrings of a third phase. So my guess is first we're going to have this report, then we have a comments period, then we have the hearings or rulemaking, something like that. Then you're expecting a phase 3?
I mean, it's well, you referenced the Drive Act, and I know that there's a lot in there, and I think there's some that references DSP, and then there was another bill that made a slight change to 7802, I believe it included transmission. It was a minor change, but it included transmission. So my guess is we'll be meeting again in some form or fashion. Will it be an official phase 3? I'm not sure. But I would agree with your assessment that, we'll follow the report. My guess is that the commission will schedule a hearing, possibly with comments, and then with a rulemaking to follow. But aside from that, I'm not sure if we'll have an official phase 3.
Great. All right. And well, then let me just say thank you to everyone. This has been 2 years for some of us together. I really appreciate all of the back and forth. We've learned a lot from you. And, the door is always open. Please do reach out with ideas, comments. We're here to listen. So thank you all for a remarkable journey.
Thank you, Ethan. And I would agree. It's been very educational for me personally. And this is not goodbye. It's till we meet again. Al.
Yeah. So whether or not there's a phase 3 that it builds on phase 1 and phase 2, which has been these technical discussions of these issues and development of recommendations, I thought that we had anticipated that this working group would then, after the rulemaking would charge the working group with the development of regulations based on whatever they finalize as what they take from the recommendations. So that would be, I wouldn't call that exactly phase 4. That would actually be the regulatory phase, right? The development of regulations, which, like with other groups, that's where, certainly with the community solar process, we spent a long time working on regulations after we went through the initial processes. So is that correct, that we would?
That's my anticipation, sir. Yeah, I think what Ethan was getting at was maybe a phase 3 to cover things that were outside of the initial commission order that generated, that resulted in this work group. So but yeah, I would definitely plan on meeting again with the regulations. And I believe that I believe in the bill that I referenced that slightly changed 7802. It also gave an additional 6 months to get the regulations in place. So it goes from July 1, 25 to December 31st of 25. So that'll be beneficial, assuming it gets signed by the governor.
So it's not adios, it's just hasta la vista.
Yeah. We'll see everyone later. It's just a question of when. All right. Anybody else? All right. Thanks again. Appreciate everyone's patience with me on these issues, and I will try and get this report out as quickly as I can.
Thanks, Judge. Thanks, everyone.
Take care.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
everyone.
Thanks, Your Honor. Thanks, everyone.